Is that on? Oh, kia ora koutou. Nice to see all these beautiful faces. I feel like I'm going to teach a fitness class up here. I don't know how long I'd last teaching a fitness class with the little headset. If it becomes difficult to hear me at some stage, I don't usually get a complaint in my life that I can't hear you. That's not normally feedback I get, but if it is hard to hear me, please let me know, because it sounds okay to me up here, but if you're struggling, do let me know. So my name is Gwendoline Keel. I'm a lawyer because no one is perfect. And I specialise in working with the venue, entertainment, events and tourism industry. So that is an area I work in all the time. And we thought it would be really great to talk to you guys about the new Health and Safety at Work Act. Everybody's heard of that, right? Yes, good. That's a really good start. We're nearly 1 year on, so the birthday is for April. We don't bring legislation in on the 1st of April. There's too many April Fool's jokes to be made there. But we've got that anniversary coming up, and we're working with the industry all the time. And we thought it would be really great to talk with you about what we see going well, what we see not going very well, and suggest to you what might be the things to focus on in the particular industry that you work in. So who works for a venue? Who is an event organiser? Lots of you. Who's an event supplier? Cool. And who's in the tourism space? Bringing Business New Zealand, Miss Jessica. Cool. So it's good just to know what it is that you all do, because that will help me shape my remarks in a helpful way for you. One of the things that the feedback we get on a lot from our clients is it's really great to talk to you because you work with the industry all the time and you actually understand how events work and how industry works and what FMILs are, and we don't have to explain that stuff to you. And this is my beautiful team that I'm part of. So as you can see, there's plenty of us. And in the tourism space, I just want to point out to you that we have the happy distinction in our team of being able to speak English, Korean, Japanese, Dutch language, Russian, Farsi, and that's just in this team alone. So if you are working with international bidders and getting documents in other languages, we can help you with that. So this team specialises in this space. You'll see there's a lot of us. We also work very heavily in the sports space, so we work for a lot of national sporting organisations and we do a lot of work in the sports space. So we do everything from contracting, health and safety, you're having a dispute with your promoter, you're getting into a ticketing contract, you are getting into a catering contract. If it's to do with the event industry, then we work in that space. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, I think the important thing is to say, how is the Act being implemented? So a lot of people say to us, we understand what the law says, but how is the regulator actually implementing this? What is WorkSafe out there actually doing in our particular industry? So we'll look at that. And I'm going to talk about specifically why the Act is important for your industry and how it works, particularly in your industry. You're in one of those industries where you have a lot of people coming together at one event or at one occasion or at one thing, and you have all these different moving cogs where different people are responsible for different things. And the question we get asked all the time is, out of all of those people at an event, who's responsible for health and safety? So we're going to explain a little bit around how to get your mind around who might be responsible for what. I'm going to talk about some gaps that we see all the time and let you have a think about how you're going when we talk about some of those gaps, if you identify with them, or if you think, no, we're doing really well in that space, and you can give yourself a big tick. And I'm particularly going to talk about a few things that have happened in the last year or so that we think are really relevant. So events where you have other people providing the entertainment, or the rides, or the FMIL, or the zip lining, or the luging, or the whatever it is. What is your responsibility as a venue, or an event organiser, or someone organising a FMIL, if I'm sending my people out to have an experience with someone else? What should I be doing to make sure that that event is safe? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about crisis communications. What might be the event in my mind over the last 6 months that would make me think about whether or not your crisis communications are any good? Anyone want to hazard a guess? Kaikoura earthquake. Any other guesses? Who thought Dreamworld dealt with that particular disaster well? Who thought That's great comms. I'm going to do what they did. That was amazing. I'm going to ask them for their comms plan. That was awesome. So we're going to talk about that. And we're going to look at some overseas lessons from some really major events we've had the benefit of witnessing and not being part of, which is often a nice way to learn. We're going to look particularly at Paris, so terrorism in Paris. We're going to look at Brussels and also look at the Olympics in Rio that had some very particular health and safety issues there that we can learn from here in New Zealand. So first of all, 1 year on, how are we going? The first thing I would say is we are in a much better position in health and safety than we were before the Pike River mining tragedy. The legislation is much more fit for purpose. It does make a lot more sense. It is more sensible legislation for what we're trying to achieve in New Zealand. So that's the first part. And from my perspective, I think there is a better understanding from people about the jigsaw pieces that go to make up health and safety and how you can make better outcomes happen by having a particular framework or system. We find that a lot of the people we're dealing with are starting to ask the right questions. So when we were first dealing with people about this, they were saying, how can I pass all the risk on to someone else? That is the wrong question because you can't do that anymore. The legislation's designed to prevent you from doing that. So people were saying to us, I need a clause in my contract to get us out of all our health and safety obligations. There is no such clause, but if you think you have one, I'm keen to have a look at it. And the regulator, which is WorkSafe, does everyone know that the regulator in the health and safety space is WorkSafe? That's their new name, capital W, capital S, never with a small s. They have a thing on their website about that. They're really into that. They produce really, really good information on their website. Who's looked at the website for WorkSafe? Cool. It's a really good one. It's really plain English. It's really accessible. You can find stuff. You can't say that about every government website, but I'd say that's one of the better ones. If you're looking for good, plain English information to give to people, particularly overseas, who are trying to understand the framework in New Zealand, or your own staff, it's a great resource, and I really do recommend it to you. In terms of case law so far, we haven't had that much in your sphere. We're going to get some, I think, out of Australia shortly, following the Dreamworld crisis. I think there will be some case law coming out there. So at the moment, the coroner is still looking into things with Dreamworld, and the health and safety regulator is still looking into things. We don't have any investigation results so far, but that is going to take months, so we'll see how that goes. There have been some New Zealand cases. There's been a payout to a family of a Taiwanese diver who died on a diving expedition here in New Zealand, a $70,000 fine imposed there. Is anyone familiar with that one? This was a person who was given scuba equipment, wasn't supervised, and her gear didn't fit properly and she drowned. So there are some cases coming out in this area, but not a lot yet. And that's what you expect with new legislation. It comes in. From the time of investigation to the time of charges being laid is generally, it can be anything from up to 6 months to a year, depending on the complexity of the accident. So we're still waiting for some case law on some things. This is really the challenge in your industry. You work with very complex supply chains. So everything you do, and if you've heard me talk before, you've probably seen this diagram before. This is one of the most challenging things about your industry that we don't necessarily see in other industries. So I might operate a factory and it's really all about me. When you guys do your thing, you involve all these people quite often. There's lots of different people doing lots of different things in lots of different places. You might do it in multiple sites. Some of those sites might be remote. They might involve frightening people on purpose, so bungee jumping, zip lining, various other things that we are, exposing people to potential danger for entertainment purposes. You kind of have that rare distinction that's fun. It's fun to be frightened by something. And so that's part of your industry that you really don't see a lot in other industries, so you're unique in that regard. And why does this matter? Because you have what are called these significant overlapping PCBU duties. Who is a PCBU? Anyone? Minus 10 people. Yeah, a person conducting a business or an undertaking. I've heard some Australian commentators call these people a peekaboo. I can't get down with that. I can't do it. But a PCBU is someone who's in charge of a business or an undertaking. So there's a few of them there, right? Everybody in that diagram is in charge of their own little bit of the puzzle. And the law now says that where you have a group of people conducting an activity together, you all have to consult, cooperate and coordinate. So you all would have heard those words, I'm sure, in relation to the Act so far. But the thorny issue for you is, how do I do that? So here I am, interacting with all these people, putting on an event, and you're responsible for the food, and I'm responsible for getting people in and out of the stadium safely, and someone else is responsible for the light show, and someone else is doing the pyro, and somebody else is doing all this other stuff. How do we work together, as the legislation requires us to ensure that that event is as safe as possible? So that's been one of the key issues that people have been discussing with us. What am I responsible for when I run a big complex event and there's all these different people and all these different moving parts? And the answer is, well, that depends. It depends what your role is in the event. But generally speaking, you should ask yourself, am I in the best position to manage this risk? If you are, then it's probably you. If you're not the best person to manage the risk, then it may be someone else. But we need to know who's managing all those risks. So you can't say to the regulator, we've had an event, I thought Jessica was taking care of that. And Jessica says, well, actually, I thought someone else was taking care of that. And then that person says, well, it's not my role. That's exactly what we want to avoid. So that's been quite a difficult thing. And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges for you guys in terms of how to draw up a health and safety plan, is deciding who's responsible for what bit. But the thing I'd like you to take away from that is someone has to be. You can't just decide on your own, that doesn't seem to be my problem, so I'll just relax that on over to the side and hope that somebody else deals with it. And of course, the reality is everyone else thinks it's your problem, right? It's not my problem. Clearly it's you that should be dealing with that. Clearly, especially if it's hard. Clearly that's not me, especially if it's expensive. Clearly that's you. You're the best person to be dealing that, and I just expect you to deal that. And so there has been this greater demand now for bespoke health and safety plans. So I've seen quite a few health and safety plans where I've gone, it looks like you're running the wrong kind of event. And they go, oh yeah, we got that from someone else. And I go, but you're not running a wine and food festival. You're running, a horse event or something different. You have different risks. Oh, but it's still an event. And I go, well, yes, a dress is a dress, except if you ask me, I don't want to wear that one, I only want to wear that one. It's the same thing here. If you can't produce bespoke health and safety plans, particularly as event organisers, that fit the event, you are going to lose business, because people won't tolerate that now, because they've come up with the idea that, gee, I'm in this with you, and if you're not playing the game, I'll go and work with someone who will. So we are hearing from people, I'm losing business because there's something wrong with the way I'm drawing up my plans, and it's at that point that they approach us when they say, I'm actually starting to lose business now. Well-documented identification and management of risks. So again, this is something that we aren't seeing done that well. There's plenty of information in the event space about how to manage risk. There aren't that many events in New Zealand that are so new and so different and so amazing that you can't talk to someone else and see how they did stuff. And of course now there are higher penalties and more severe consequences. So for the first time we have a custodial sentence under the health and safety legislation, reserved for the most egregious of offending, obviously, but much bigger fines, and a clear indication from the regulator that at an appropriate moment when they're done engaging, educating and coaxing us along, they'll get to a point where they go, and now you have to comply. So, how are you going if you look at the fact that these are the gaps that we see in our practice all the time? So these are the ones that we see every day, that people talk to us about every day. So what is SEP syndrome? Anyone know what that is? This is someone else's problem. This is a big syndrome. It's a big illness in this sector, as it is in many others. It's someone else's problem to worry about this, that, or the other thing in relation to the event. We still see that a lot. Why should it be me that has to check that? Why should I have to check that the zipline operator has the correct licenses in place to run their business if I'm just sending someone on a FMIL? Why do I have to check that? That's their problem. So a lot of that, not accepting that as a PCBU you have those overlapping duties where now health and safety is everyone's problem. A lot of people still aren't dealing with that well. And then inside of organisations themselves, a lot of people calling us and saying, I'm an event management company, there's 13 people who work here, we kind of have fluid titles, it's quite a flat structure. Who are our officers? We don't know who the officers are, and we know that they're the ones with the big duty under the Act. We don't know who those people are or how to identify them, and the management is nervous because none of us are quite sure internally where the buck stops. So we're still seeing a lot of that. People are still saying to us, what's a PCBU? We're still not clear if we are one or not. Some people think, I'm a one-man band, I'm not a PCBU. Is that, well, you are, and you're in it on your own. So there's a lot of that still happening, and not really being able to think about how to deal with those overlapping duties in a practical way. So actually, how am I going to document things? How am I going to have that in my contracts? How am I going to ensure that those things get dealt with at the toolbox meeting in the morning, or the event briefing in the morning, or the whatever it is? So just those practical things. So if any of these are resonating with you, you're not on your own. A lot of the documentation and contracts we see still refer to the old Act, and they don't have new things in them that say things like, you supplier, or you client, or you whoever will consult, cooperate and coordinate with everyone else. You will do what you're meant to do in relation to these things. That's part of our deal. So we're still not seeing a lot of that done well. We get a lot of people coming in and saying, we'd like you to independently review our health and safety system. And when we do that, we find that a lot of people have policies and procedures, but there's no framework that it kind of fits into. So you might have a great policy about one thing, but it doesn't explain how you're going to report to your PCBU or your board or your officers. It doesn't talk about how you're going to use continuous improvement. It's kind of sitting on its own, and on its own, it's a perfectly fine document. But if it doesn't fit into a wider framework, you will find that in the real world, it's just a policy sitting in a drawer, and it won't actually help you to comply in that wider framework sense. So one of the really big issues at the moment that we're seeing is where entertainment or events are provided by other people for you. So you're contracting with others, or you're using others to provide the entertainment for whatever it is. So I go to an opening event and someone's doing the pyrotechnics, someone's doing the dancers and the fire jugglers, someone's doing the band or the music. That entertainment's all been put on by someone else. And there's just some headlines here that we picked up pretty quickly, where you've got people that may well go along to these events and be exposed to harm. They're all a little bit different, amusement parks, monster slide rides, bouncy castle rides, but you can see a theme here. This is where someone's getting onto a thing that somebody else provides, and a lot of venues are telling us they're not quite sure how to deal with the client who comes along and says, I'm putting on an A&P show and I'm going to have a Ferris wheel and Dodgem cars and Can-Am cars and a petting zoo and these other things. What do we need from those people? So this is actually, in your area, is a really big deal, because you're frequently handing over your clients to someone else to entertain them, and then they're kind of handing them back. It's a very common feature of this industry. The example that I've got for you today is a venue approached us and they said, we've got a third party wanting to bring on amusement rides. So who knew in New Zealand that amusement rides have their own set of regulations? The amusement device regulations. Have you not all read them? They hang off the Machinery Act at this point in time, and there are a whole set of legislative requirements. Most councils in New Zealand require you to have a licence and a permit if you want to have those kind of rides on any kind of council land. So your AMP show is a really great example of that kind of thing. So we said to the client, well, there's things you should be doing, before the event, and there's things you should be during the event, and things what we recommend you do after the event. So this is just an example, and you can apply this type of example to anything, a famil, sending someone out ziplining or doing whatever it is they're doing, having an experience. So these are the kind of things that we've said, this is the kind of stuff we would expect you to do if someone wants to bring an entertainment ride into your venue. This is just what we would expect you to require of them. So before the event, documenting your requirements with them, being quite clear with them, here's what we need you to do if you want to pack in and then operate it. And if you can't do these things, you can't pack in and or operate. And you need to have that really clearly set out in your contract. You can't just, who's had that conversation with someone? You can't pack in, we're not happy. And they'll say, well, we have to, today's pack-in day. Very useful to be able to say, the contract says you can't pack in until you've done these 5 things, and we're missing number 5. So, very important. Inspection prior to event, and then expectations about what it is you require of them during the event. During the event, we would expect you to do these things and document that. Now, you may not be doing much of this yourself. This is just an expectation setting exercise. When you're in our venue, when you're doing these things in our venue, here's how you have to roll it. And if you don't do it like that, then we may not let you use our venue, or we may stop you from doing what you're doing. So that's the during. So obviously the pre-start safety meeting, we're all pretty familiar with those. Some kind of a walk around or inspection on the day, we're all familiar with those. And then an end of the day debrief. These are really important. Would we have these guys back again? Did it work well? What didn't work well? What could we do better next time? What should we have checked that we didn't? Did we check them often enough? How could we improve this for next time? And that's all about that continuous improvement. So that's this one here. How did it all go afterwards? So that's just an example of, I've got someone coming in and they're doing something. What do I have to be interested in what they're doing? And always ask yourself the question, what if we do nothing and something goes wrong? And it's always a really centering question for most people, to say, how is it going to be if we just sort of go, oh, I'm sure it'll be fine, and then it isn't fine? How is that going to be for us? And you want to be measured in your response. You don't want to be that hysterical person that everyone thinks needs to lie down and a cup of tea and just to calm down. You want to be measured in your response, and part of that is going, what is dangerous about this thing? What is the critical risk here? What could really go wrong? And then responding appropriately to that. But if you are in doubt, my advice would be overcautious. So crisis communications. Hands up if you have a crisis communication plan. When the shit hits the fan, who's got a piece of paper that says how you communicate with everyone about the fact that the shit has hit the fan? Who has one? 2, you're not sure.
I think we do, I just don't know what it is.
Great. I hope you're not on it. Yeah. You kind of need one. And if you haven't got across the coverage of post-Dreamworld disaster, it's all over the net, and is widely now, I think, regarded as an example of what not to do. It is really important, and we're not minimising the tragic aspect of the event, and I would like to say that Cindy Lowe, who died on that ride, was a friend of mine at university and a flatmate, so I'm not in any way being flippant about that accident at all. But how you handle things once the crisis has occurred is actually really important, and it's important for a number of reasons. One, you are going to lose value in your brand and your identity if it's handled badly. Social media is such now that if you don't have a plan that just works and you can just roll out and it's all quite immediate, what don't you get the luxury of with social media? Time. Can you control the content that goes out about your crisis anymore? No. Everyone's there recording it on their smartphone, and news agencies are asking people Do they have content that they can show? Send us the stuff off your smartphone and we'll show it. So the key problem here is, if you look at just a couple of these headlines, is that once the social media train is underway, you can't stop it. It has a life of its own. And the problem now with crisis communications is they are immediate. You used to sort of be able to wait until, if you had the accident at 9 in the morning, the 6 o'clock news was kind of a way off. You don't have that luxury anymore. News streams all the time immediately. So what is said and by whom should form part of your crisis management plan. So knowing that the person who needs to talk to the media in the event of a crisis is that person, and people need to be able to get hold of them. If I ring that cell phone and it goes, "Hi, it's Gwen, I'm at Show Me Wellington today, leave me a message, I'll get back to you just as soon as I can." You can imagine the stress level of the person trying to ring that first person. So, does your crisis management deal with who talks to the media? And you need to be clear about that, because in many organisations, the chairman of the board may feel that is his or her role. The CEO may feel that's his or her role. And then you may get an operations manager who feels, well, it's a crisis and everything is different and I will just talk to the media. And you may get employees who think, well, I'll just say something positive and that'll be okay. It probably won't be. So it needs to be part of your integrated risk management plan, that if you are in the unfortunate circumstance that something has gone dreadfully wrong, how are we going to communicate that? Who is going to do that and in what manner? Really important to have that plan. Really important that it includes social media. If your crisis management plan is about TV and radio only, that is hopeless in today's world. Your social media crisis plan needs to deal with all the social media that's out there. And if something goes wrong at the event, so imagine we are, with most events, we're all out of our office. Who's in their office today? Quite. If something goes wrong at this event, where is that person? How do we get hold of that spokesperson? They may not be at the event where something goes wrong, but that's where the media will go. So actually at the event, do you have someone that can say something if something goes wrong? Or do you have someone that can get hold of the person who can? And can we give that number out and that's who the media talk to? And what will they say? If that person doesn't know, hasn't been trained, hasn't had any guidance about what to say, what might they say? And if the answer is, when they're panicking and stressed and they don't have all the information, that they may not even be on site, they may have no idea what's really happened, they're getting all the information secondhand, have they been trained to talk to the media or not? And have you tested it? Does it actually work? Have you actually tried to ring that person on the list and say, we're having a crisis? Someone's just fallen off the stage and broken their leg. Or, someone has just hurt themselves really badly at our event. If you don't test it, then you won't know. Whose events occur in business hours? Whose events frequently occur outside business hours? Cool. So if you run your test, run it in whichever scenario, but if your plan is designed to work from 9 till 5, when everyone's at work at their desk phone or sitting in front of their computer, I would say that that's a failing, unless that's only when stuff happens in relation to your event. And you may have an accident at pack-in at 11 o'clock at night. It might not be that the accident happens during the opening time of the event. It could be pack-in, it could be pack-out. So looking at what's been happening overseas and the lessons we can draw from that in the health and safety space, we talk a lot about this sliding scale of risks at events, starting with vandalism, teenagers setting fire to rubbish, letting off your fire extinguishers, unlocking gates that are supposed to be locked, or doing anything like that. So that's vandalism. Now, vandalism can cause health and safety hazards at your venues and your events, and we all know that. That's kind of at the low end of the scale. In the middle, we have activism. This is people who don't like your event because it features the Defence Force, people who make weapons, people who perhaps test medicine on animals, fashion designers who have fur in their collections. There are any number of things that offend people, and they may wish to disrupt your event to let other people know they don't approve of the content in that way. So that's kind of in the middle, and we've certainly had some good examples here in Wellington. In fact, in this building, Adam, where a Defence Force conference was being held here, and it was massively disrupted by protesters, and it all ended up on the news. And then, of course, at the other end of the scale, we have terrorism, which is kind of the zenith of the scale. This is people who are simply wishing to hurt other people or disrupt events to bring attention to whatever that cause is. Now, who thinks that that's never going to happen in New Zealand? And of course, the answer is, we've already had an act of terrorism in New Zealand. A lot of people regard the Rainbow Warrior bombing as an act of terrorism. So most security consultants in Australia and New Zealand are talking about if not when. They've certainly had several major incidents headed off in Australia in recent times where people have been intercepted about to do harm to major events. So there is that sliding scale where you might think, I don't have to prepare for a terrorist attack on my event because that's not real. That's never going to happen at my event. But you could get vandals, you could get activists, you could, in a worst case scenario, be dealing with someone who just is not feeling very mentally well that day and has access to a firearm and goes into their local MSD office and starts shooting people like they did in Ashburton. And that health and safety prosecution has gone through, and MSD were convicted of failing to provide a safe environment for those staff because that gunman was able to get past the front counter to access staff. So the design of the office was the problem there from a health and safety perspective. That's a very meaningful lesson for us when we're looking at how people access your event. So those things are really important, and these threats are more frequent. They are coming closer to home. There's been a lot of this activity in Australia. People are radicalised now online. They don't have to be attached to a local cell or group or whatever. They just need access to the internet. So what that's meant is that mass gatherings have become more susceptible to attack. So anywhere we get a large number of people together, and in the US, one of the largest mass gathering risks now is shopping malls. So the US shopping mall community is very concerned at the moment just because there's a lot of people in one place. And this leads to issues with security and access control. How easy is it to just walk into your event? Are people identified? Do we do anything to try and search their belongings? Do we know who they are? Do we know where they are? I was very impressed to see everybody being scanned into the room when I came here today. I don't see that level of security very often, and I thought that was a really good thing. How easy is it for members of the public to wander into your event? We're all familiar with people who lunch crash in the exhibition hall, and they're nicely dressed people from the nearby offices, and they make a little game of it. And it's kind of funny in a way, but how did they get in? And the other thing we've learnt from overseas is infrastructure risks. So particularly in Rio, what do you do when the water or the power goes off? So if all the power were to go off to downtown Wellington, how are you going to respond to that? If the water's bad, if you're in a bad neighbourhood, which was the problem in Rio, and people are getting shot outside your venues, and there's bodies on the ground in the morning that the staff have to clear away. I mean, it seems incredible to us, but that was going on in Rio. How are you dealing with those things? And there are these really things that clients want now. They want everyone to have an experience. They want, the drinks to be served to them in a shipping container, or they want bouncy castles for adults when people have had a few drinks and things like that. And you're laughing because you know it's true. And now cyber risk. So it's a really easy way to attack your event from the safety and comfort of my own home is to hack into your database and send information to your patrons or find out who your guest list is or when your VIPs are arriving or the right people that I want to protest in front of. So these things are all very relevant here in New Zealand. Drones have been an issue overseas. Does everyone have a drone policy in relation to their events? Is that no? Okay, that's some homework for you to think about. Drones are potentially very dangerous things, not only because they can be armed, but because they can fall out of the sky. And they're, a lot of them are quite big now. They're large enough to carry a pizza and deliver you a book, so they're quite large things. And of course, the perennial favourite, alcohol. Alcohol is a health and safety risk at events. Who in the room has had in their life the experience of getting a UDI, an unidentified drinking injury, where you get up the next day and you go, what did I do there? So alcohol is a risk factor. It's a huge risk factor at events because it makes people do stuff they wouldn't normally do. And we advocate quite different contractual approaches. We were recently contacted by a venue that said, we've got a client who wants to cap their liability for their event, and we said, is there alcohol involved? And they said yes, and we said no, don't agree. Our experience is that alcohol makes things more dangerous faster. And have you got a plan to manage your sponsors? We love sponsors, they make everything possible, and that's wonderful, but it's a little bit like when you pay for the wedding, right? Now you think you can invite whoever you want, sit them wherever you want. I paid for the wedding, so I'm allowed to do X, Y, Z. This is kind of how sponsors are. They think they should be able to do whatever they want because they're paying you some money, but you need to manage that because they might want to fly a drone over and stream the footage and put it on Facebook, and they might want to take photos of people and post them and do different things, and that might actually create some health and safety problems for you. Or they want to provide an experience. We've got this cool Canon gun and it shoots stuff out into the crowd and we want to use that. So understanding what sponsors want to do is really, really important. And you have to plan for these issues. It's really vital now. If you can't demonstrate that you've thought about these issues and how you will respond to them and who is going to deal with it and how you're going to deal with it, that is bad. So that is just the takeaway message. The regulator does not want to hear, we just thought it would be okay. It seemed fine to us. It never occurred to us that if you shoot things into a crowd, you could hit someone in the head. So those kinds of things. And practicing your response is really, really important. So things that aren't practiced don't go well. So if you haven't practiced some of these drills, that's why it's important to practice them. Nobody can think while they are panicking. That is why if you are a first responder, you've been trained in things like ABC, airway, breathing, circulation. You've been trained in these crash techniques because we know that people who are panicking can't think straight. So you have to teach them these routines and you go through them again and again and again. And you see this in the military, which is the ultimate crisis situation. You're a soldier, it just gets drilled into you. My partner is an ex-soldier and then an ex-police officer and now a health and safety officer. And we have great conversations about because he's very practical. He's on the ground working for a large multinational company. And he's great to talk to say, what would happen if this happened? And you go, people will do this. And he's a great resource. You can ring him up and say, how will people respond? He said, they'll all do this. And it's because he's just seen that so many times. So if you haven't got a crisis management plan, if you haven't got a communications plan, if you haven't tested any of those things, please can I implore you to do that. It is really so important. How you respond in a crisis is very important. Are you more or less likely to get in trouble with the regulator if you've handled it badly? Who is going to tolerate now, with the response from Dreamworld, who will tolerate them not being charged? Because if you don't handle the response well, if you kind of fumble that, what does everyone assume about your health and safety program? They'll just assume that wasn't very bloody good either. And it might have been, but if you fumble the way that you deal with it, everyone assumes that you're fumbling everything. And it really can make a difference to how people perceive your brand and your business going forward. So that's not to minimise the impact of the event itself, I don't mean that at all, but it is actually really important to focus on how you respond as well. So reflect candidly on how you've dealt with health and safety in your business in the last 12 months. Have you actually changed anything, reviewed anything, looked at anything? Do you actually do anything differently? Or are you satisfied that you were so awesome beforehand that you didn't need to change anything? And if that's the case, bravo. That's amazing. And have a look at what this means for you in the next 12 to 24 months. So you've got new events coming on, new clients coming on, new things you want to do. How are you going to have to change the way you do things in the next 12 to 24 months? Because we will get to a period of time, like I said, when the regulator is going to stop engaging and educating quite so much and is going to expect you to perform. And we're sort of going to get into that in the next couple of years. So check in and read about and stay up to date with best practice here and overseas. You are competing for content here and overseas. People won't use you if it looks a bit, we're down the bottom of the world and we just don't roll it like that down here. It's all cool and we're really laid back and we're an island nation and it's wicked. People won't use you. That's not acceptable overseas anymore. So when you're competing for business, you have to realise this is now part of your competitive edge. If you really have your shit together in this space, people respond to that very positively. And on the other hand, if you don't, they just won't use you. And I think that's happening more and more. And, you know, if you need some help, ask for it. There are health and safety consultancies proliferating in New Zealand now. It's very much a growth industry. They're everywhere. But I would say to you, you must use someone who understands your industry. It's no good using someone who doesn't get what you do. It's a little bit like ringing your insurer who deals with your cars and saying, I need rain insurance for an event. And they go, what? They don't know how to talk to you or what to focus on or what to think about, and it's the same in this space. And, you know, stay safe if you possibly can. That would be great. I'm around all day. I'm a friendly person. Please come and say hi. If you have questions or things you're grappling with in this space, I'm more than happy to talk to you. So please do come and grab me. And that's me there if you need to get hold of me. So I think we have a couple of minutes if anyone has any questions. Everyone's totally okay with everything and completely up to speed, so that's awesome. And we'll never need to meet in a professional capacity. Great, thanks guys.
Good?
Yeah, all good.
Excellent. Just a reminder, guys, that there's food distributed all over the place. The cafe is doing a roaring trade, and the outside, I think Jamie said earlier on that if you want to go outside